Hello everyone, I'm Josh. Welcome to my channel. We are now halfway through my 5th year on BookTube. You would think by now that at this time of the year, I would realize what to expect. And yet here we are again, midway through the year, and I am freaking the fuck out. I'm joking. We're here for the mid-year freakout tag. I am excited to present this to you. It is going to be a hefty tag. I have prepared a great deal of bookish content to talk to you about, probably more than I should have. But you know, I have a lot of thoughts for the things that I've read this year, a lot of things I want to say. I've massaged the questions a bit, been inspired by others who've changed some questions, and I've sort of shaped it to be sort of a mid-year check-in. Let's start off with question number 1. How is my reading going? And for this, let's just do some general stats. I've read 63 books. Why do I have 67? My pages says 20,427 pages. That's close enough. It is honestly my best year since 2020 when it comes to number of books that I've read. Things have happened in life, giving me more free time. I guess I'm glad to see at least some good has come from some less good things happening. You can see here the inspiration of the new year plus just the free time. Then it's sort of a lose thing as things get busy. And then come May and June, I've had really good months. We'll talk more about the type of books that I'm reading later on. As far as quality though, that's the big question. How I may be reading more, but are the books actually better? And unfortunately, they do not seem to be substantially better. In fact, they seem to be worse. I suppose they're okay, 3.9, 3.92 average, with a lot of 5 stars and 4.5 stars. But there's a caveat here because a lot of these higher ones are rereads, so the actual value there is lower. I didn't think this graph up by reads and rereads. For that kind of information, stick around for the rest of the year, end of the year wrap up, when I do like a really deeper dive into my stats. Like it's an okay, but like there's been a lot of mixed books, and even some really low ones. I think I'm giving myself some freedom here to allow myself to rate things 1 and 2 stars. But I've also DNF'd like 4 or 5 books this year as well. I've been in a rut and allowing myself to just pick up books. Like if I'm not feeling something, just putting it down and picking up something that I know I'll be able to get through. Sometimes that means just rereading a comfort read, or even just picking up a book that I think is going to be an easy, lazy read. And I think when I do that, I do it because it'll be a fun ride, even if I end up having criticism for the book, leading to me having, I think, more mid experience. Comparing this specifically to last year, we're looking at a normalized number of books now instead of the raw number. Point is that you can see here, things aren't that different, especially when it comes to 4.5 and 5 stars. Of course, if you were to consider that without rereads, that'd be a different question. But what you see is that you have a lot less 4 stars. You have a chunk of 4 stars that are basically getting shifted down slightly to 3.5 and lower. I don't have the color coded here, I'm realizing now. My red is 2024, blue is 2023. In 2023, my average was like 4 stars instead of 3.9. So we're looking at like a 0.1 drop. Overall, so it's a mixed bag. I had good reads, but not as good as they were last year, but more of them. Does it even out? Does that make it okay? I don't really know. I'm not here to interpret that. As far as some goals, one of the major goals I've been doing this year, trying to read more backlist books. And there is some positive improvement, but not where I was aiming for. We have my number of books that I've read within a published year range, in 2023 versus 2024. And there's some noticeable improvements. I'm reading more books published before the year 2010, I guess. It's at least not 2/3 in 2020, but it's definitely not as low as the 1/3 I'm aiming for. That's something that's improving, but still not quite where I want it to be. Now, the next question, I wanted to do best and worst books of 2024 so far. The best, let's talk about Ted Chiang's Stories of Your Life and Others. This is his older short story collection. I absolutely adored this. This really reflects Ted Chiang's skill at speculative writing, of using it with purpose. There's usually themes in there he's trying to dissect, but also it's just this really, I think, intelligent use of a speculative premise. He takes a premise that is really intriguing and uses it in a really thoughtful way. And that's what made this shine. And then also, one of my most recent reads was On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous by Ocean Vuong. This one was beautiful and heart-wrenching. It was told so amazingly. And it's the story of this Vietnamese immigrant queer boy. I say story of. I think I've seen a lot of critiques of it because it doesn't really have a coherent narrative. It kind of jumps between time. But in my mind, this book explores the growing up and life and relationship of this boy with his mother. And I thought it was really effective at touching major cornerstones in his life while also exploring significant themes in his life. And for me, it resonated. And then finally, I want to do at least one nonfiction, Find Me the Votes by Michael Iskoff. Not as highly rated as the other two, but close enough, 4.5 stars. This is basically the story of Bonnie Willis's relationship to the Georgia election case, the attempt by Donald Trump to basically find 11,000 whatever votes. And I say her story because it's not really just her story. If anything, it's like a history lesson up through the events of what happened up to now when the case gets brought up. The book was interesting. I think revealed some stuff I didn't know. But I think what really made this book shine was just how well it was crafted. It is a excellent form of political nonfiction. Like it worked in the way how I just couldn't stop reading it. The writing was compelling, and the crafting of the narrative of the historical events was done really efficiently, really effectively, I should say. This is in contrast to say someone like whatever his name is, who does like Fear or that trilogy of Trump books, who has a habit of just publishing a series of events without giving any context or clear narrative. And I think I definitely prefer this approach where you craft the events into a coherent narrative to communicate the point, takeaway of what's been going on. And there was a line in there we had about, not telling people what to think, but then there's still a narrative you can take away from history without being too biased. There are facts that fit into a factual narrative. Finally, 2 worst books. There was a Doctor Strange book that I read, or DNF, I should say. This book was horrendous. I come to found out that the book was an adaptation of comics, which I guess makes more sense because it was very episodic. It did not feel very coherent, but it was also extremely lazy. I didn't need to finish it. So usually I don't rate a book if I haven't finished it, but this is one of those books where you don't need to finish it to know that it's just bad. I thought this would be one of those, easy books I referred to at the beginning of this video, needing to see like a lazy, easy pick when I'm feeling down. Like yes, it was, but it wasn't even enjoyable. I couldn't even enjoy being a fan of the premise or of the character because of how horrible the writing was. Every scene was just dialogue back and forth, had people telling them exactly what they think, including the villains, exposition dumping what they're doing, when they're going to do it, and it was just really cringe and it was really bad. Knowing that it's an adaptation of a comic, I think makes it worse, because it's like, if you want to adapt the scene, you can't just adapt the dialogue. You need to learn, to be able to figure out how to adapt that into a narrative structure, and they didn't do it. It was horrendous. It was so bad. Like, I'm angry at them. Like, in the MCU is so big, and it's like, obviously they're constantly going to be making new products for it. And I hate seeing mediocre people get big money like that. And it's a very bold thing, but here we are. That's what we're here for, the best and worst. And then The Shape of a Life by Xing-Tung Yao. This is a mathematician's memoir and biography. And in short, I just really dislike him as a person. He is an academic and a mathematician who comes across as extremely smug, self-entitled, and extremely fake. A big through line of this book are all of the personal grievances and petty conflicts he has with people, and how he has a way of passive aggressively undermining them while simultaneously saying he doesn't understand why they're mad. Like, he has no ill will. Everything is all peachy, and it's just so obviously fake. I think I had a written review of this. I didn't do a video of it. I feel like I did a video review of this because I had so much to say about it. Check out my Goodreads review for that. But it was so apparent to me this is just someone who was extremely superficial and is the epitome of everything wrong with academia and the worst of academia and the people in power within it. And I just despise it. This was the one star I think I gave. Maybe, unless I gave Doctor Strange 1 too. Either way, on to question 3, the best sequel 2024. This is going to be much more concise. It's going to be the sequels of My Heart is a Chainsaw, the Indian Lake trilogy. I adored this series. One of my favorite series of all time, let alone horror series. I thought the sequels were phenomenal at continuing the story of these characters we love while developing it in a natural and justifiable way. Like, it felt like it really deserved its existence while also being extremely satisfying. I think between the two, the book 2 was my favorite of the three. And so phenomenal series, phenomenal sequels, easily the best. Check out my review of this if you haven't seen it. It should be spoiler-free. I say spoiler-free. I discuss themes and I discuss major directions, but not necessarily plot points. I won't get into the minutia of what constitutes a spoiler. Moving on to number 4, the best and worst rereads of 2024. Another one that I modified to include the worst, because while I do reread books that I enjoy, I naturally will sometimes have criticisms of books that I have read. For this one, I guess we'll start with the worst. I'm going to talk about it so much. Let's start with the honorable mention. It's going to be Lord of Lost by Darren Shane. But I've been rereading the Demonata series by Darren Shane, arguably my favorite series as a child. And I'm on this sort of read journey. The last time I read this was probably around 2010. So it's been over a decade, probably nearly a decade and a half. I don't remember the last time I read it. But a lot of it left my mind. And a lot stands out because I love horror. And I actually think Darren Shane does a lot more in horror than most YA writers will. Then I also see the very bad, lazy plotting, the toxic masculinity and at times somewhat sexist mentality of these teen boys. And I'm not here for it. I'm hoping to do a full review of this series when I finish rereading it. I say review. It's more going to be a discussion, reflection on, it's a childhood favorite. Because I don't think people are necessarily excited about the Demonata, but it's more about an outlet for me to reflect on something that I have loved and adored and ask myself where it sits in sort of in that history of my life and my reading experience. I think that's the interesting side to me, and I think hopefully to y'all. The actual worst reread is going to be Seasonal Fears by Shauna McGuire, and I hate saying that. I hate saying it's the worst by Shauna McGuire. I was reading this for the title Fears. I reread the entire series for this. I tried to do that, same as I did with Indian Lake Trilogy. And I don't regret doing it because it helped me, I think, appreciate the good and bad of Title Fears. But at the same time, as soon as I started Seasonal Fears, after having just reread Middle Game, it was so clearly apparent of all of its shortcomings, and it was clearly worse than I remembered it. I have a spoiler-free review of Title Creatures where I talk about the little details of why I think Title Creatures stands out and how it compares to the other two, if you want more of that conversation. But really, Seasonal Fears, easily just not a good book and not honestly a fun reread. To not be Middle Game is like one thing, but then just be objectively bad in a lot of ways is another thing. So. And the best reread, though, this one really quite easy. Hotline by Dmitry Naswala. I read this last year, I think, and that was because it was spotlighted in Canada Reads of last year, which is a competition that goes on where they try to find a book every Canadian should read. I'm not Canadian, I lived there for 6 years for grad school. I was just really irked when I saw this get kicked off the competition because someone wanted a more uplifting book. And quite frankly, I think this book is really uplifting. Yes, it is devastating and heart-wrenching to see this immigrant woman's journey as she moves to Canada from the Middle East. And she brings her young son, and her husband's not there. Part of this story is just seeing her acclimate, while also we're getting to learn more about her history and her relationship with her husband and why he's not there. And really, for me, it's just the emotional weight that is attached to her. This is the heart at the core of the story of these characters that I absolutely adored. And that is so apparent in a reread. I reread it largely, one, because I just loved it, but also because it came out on audio, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I want to, again, highlight the story. It's on Scribd/Everend if you have that service, so it's there if you want to listen to it, makes it more accessible. Please check this book out. It is woefully underappreciated. It is awesome. Okay, another edition of mine, the biggest disappointments. And this one is hard. How do you classify a disappointment? It's not quite the same as the worst. For me, it's a book that I had high expectations for, and then it just let me down. And this can be very personal, and frankly, I could make an argument for a lot of books, even books that I loved. But for this, I'm going to stick on for just two main ones. First one's going to be One Place, One Time by Gillian McAllister, because this just highlights my difficult time with finding thrillers that really work for me. I've had those that I've loved. Some I wonder if I would have loved as much if I were to reread them. But this is just a thriller about a woman who is sort of in a time loop, and maybe it's Groundhog, where her son has done something bad and she's sort of reliving moments of her life, and she has to solve this crime. And it was intelligently made enough for a time travel story. I think what really pushed me to read this, I heard a lot of people talk about it. I think it was Mara from books like Whoa, really compelled me to do it. And she's not wrong that it's competently told. There's just something about the thriller aspect that just did not appeal to me. I didn't feel that much of an attachment. I didn't care. It was interesting and it was easy. It did the job, but it didn't hit as hard as I thought it might for a competently told time travel story. I love time travel. It's definitely one of the tropes I will go to just for a good time, even if I know the reread will be mediocre. Just because sometimes the mere premise can be enough to propel a book to a realm of satisfaction and joy. And this one is fine. I'm not going to reread it. It's not even that level for me. It was just a book that I had hoped would do something new with thrillers for me. I think it's really just the tone generally of thrillers that don't work for me, with some exceptions. Maybe one day before I die, I'll figure out what thrillers work for me and what don't, and why they don't. Who knows? Biggest surprises. The first one's going to be The Dead Take the A Train by Cassandra Khaw and Richard Kadri. This one surprised me because I had heard a lot of mixed reviews about Cassandra Khaw's books, and I was worried I would not like their writing. But honestly, I thought the writing was easy and fun. At the very least, their writing will, I think, give me that. I think that's an important bar. But for this, I think it was also just the tone of the world. It's like an urban fantasy, Lovecraftian, that's the best way to describe this. For me, I felt like I was in the world of Angel or Buffy. I think Angel's more apt, but I think, is it New York brand? It's something like New York. Because like Angel's in LA, well, not in LA, but it's very much that tone of being in this city full of demons and monsters, even with like this law firm or this giant corporation that is basically making deals with the devil. And I can't stress enough how much I felt like I was just back in the world of Buffy in all the best ways. Buffy, or I say Angel, they're both great. There's something about Angel though, that gritty realness that comes with the LA experience, like in that show, that I think really worked for me here. Like it's not real. I guess it is more like in the Whedon-esque camp side. Camp as in an area of people, but also camp as in, campy. Either way, the level of joy I had from this was just what surprised me here. Next up, What Makes This Book So Great by Jo Walton. This is like a 2014 nonfiction collection of supposedly essays, but really they're just blog posts that she wrote for Tor.com as she reread classic speculative fiction. And I think what surprised me here was that despite this being full of just extremely niche stories at times, and damn, it worked. There were so many books that I want to read now. When it comes to my backlist TBR project, I wish I had read this first, because there are so many in here that makes me want to read. And it feels like she's having a conversation with you. I think that's the benefit of the blog style, is that I do feel like she's talking to me just casually, having conversation. She can be witty, she's funny, and I just really enjoyed the writing. As a whole, my ability to read through and about a bunch of books I'd never even heard of was just surprisingly efficient. It was surprisingly effective, And that's what made this book really excel. That's why I loved this, but also was surprised by it. Moving on. Best and worst film adaptations you saw this year. So this is a modification from an edition of Angela for Literature Science Alliance. I want to start with American Fiction, which is based off of Erasure by Percival Everett. I've not read that book. I definitely want to now. This book was one of the best of last year. I did not get to it because it was not out in Australia, because Australia sucked when it comes to releases for some reason. But I did get to it finally, and it was I knew it would be comedic and sort of satirical, but there was a real heart to it that I did not expect, that I absolutely adored. And I thought it was an extremely thoughtful film, and I can't wait to see what the book actually has to say. It's basically, the film at least, is about this professor, this writer, who writes, literary works, and his publisher and the people in the industry want him to write books that center on Black themes, Black ideas. Generally, when they say that, they mean Black stereotypes. And when he gets angry and pissed, he just sort of decides to write the most absurd or in his mind, absurd and extreme narratives. And people latch onto it hard. And so it just sort of goes from there. It is a thoughtful, funny, and surprisingly heartfelt film with a really great cast. Definitely worth watching. And again, I'm going to read that book. House of the Dragon is on now. Honestly, I like this show. I did last season. I'm not at the height that I was when I was watching Game of Thrones. And again, I was 10 years younger when Game of Thrones started. So I probably was more malleable, that kind of thing. Still, I'm enjoying it more the more and more I watch it. I'm not read the book. I'm not sure if I ever will. Yeah, I haven't read the books, but I'm aware of the book stuff because I've immersed myself in spoilers. So I appreciate the changes. I think it's interesting. I think it just is implying a certain commentary on the nature of his history. And I think it's a fascinating aspect, among other things, with the story. And it's just, it's just a fun watch. Those are the two best ones I'd say right now. Good, because those always classify as good. For TV shows, we'll go with Presumed Innocence. Watching it now on Apple TV, and it's one of those shows that are just fun and enjoyable to watch and compelling. I'm not caught up on it, but it is really good in the first couple episodes that I've seen. Similar to this, I'm gonna say Dark Matter, which I came into this show ready to shit on it, and honestly, I still kind of shit on it, but it's fun. Like, it's fun and it's effective, and like it's better than some of the trash TV out right now. And so, kudos to Blake Crouch for at least being able to make a coherent story from a fun premise. I was actually pretty glued to the television for the entire time. So if you haven't checked that out and you're a fan of the book, I definitely think you probably will enjoy the show. Then we get some bad adaptions, just blatantly. The Watchers by A.M. Shine. And this one, I've not read the book. I don't think I will. This is M. Night Shyamalan's daughter's movie. When I first watched this, I thought, damn, she has a great idea, but really terrible writing. And if this is an adaptation of the book, it makes me think maybe she's not a bad writer, maybe it's just the author. Because I love the premise, and I don't think enough is done horror-wise with this type of creature. And I don't want to reveal if you want to be surprised, because it's presented as a mystery. It's I love the basic premise and the idea behind it. I just don't think it was crafted in a coherent way. I thought the story was really forced, and it was just not well told. But as a concept, I think it's really good. And honestly, even the atmosphere and the presentation is there. There's a real skill there, I think, for M. Night Shyamalan's daughter here. But I do not think she has the storytelling prowess right now. That's the right word, right? I think. The next one, let's go on to anticipated or need to watch adaptations of 2024. This is another edition of mine. Interview with a Vampire. I have not finished season 1, partly because it is so difficult to get my hands on it, at least legally, and I want to figure out a way to do that so I can support it, because it's actually a really great adaptation. They've changed it from the book, the first season at least, and but not significantly, just enough to make it more modern, make it more unique, while also, I think, highlighting the things that were a little too subtle before. The queer subtext is no longer subtextual. It's very much there, and for all the better. It's a really great show. So now you haven't seen that show, and you're into that kind of stuff, it's definitely worth watching. I consider that prestige television. Other than that, we have Shogun and Heartstopper. Heartstopper I love. I've yet to read the actual graphic novels. I'm pretty sure they're out here. And Shogun is a story that's already out that I absolutely want to watch, and I've only heard, it's one of the best shows of the year, I've heard. Definitely something I intend to watch, hopefully before the end of the year. And if you haven't, well, hopefully it's on your radar now. Moving on now to new releases you haven't read yet but want to. Then we do 3. The Age of Magical Overthinking by Amanda Montel. This was on my TBR for the spring. I did not get to it, and I definitely want to. This is a nonfiction book about the nature of, I think, cult thinking, things like that, from a linguist perspective. And as I said in that TBR video for the spring, I think it's an intriguing perspective to bring this kind of conversation that I've kind of heard before. Cuckoo by Gretchen Felker Martin. I get an audiobook of this. I messed up, did not download it in time, and now it's not there. And it's on Everand, and I'm going to have to end up buying it on Audible. I'm really hoping it'll end up on Libby or Everand before I do that. And I would have read it by now, honestly. For Pride Month, I would have read it. But this one, I don't actually have any details about. I'm realizing now. She is an author who I've heard really intriguing things about, and I think her type of writing will probably be something I'm into. That is to say, gratuitous, gruesome horror that I think deals with some queer subtext themes. And then finally, The Rule Breaker by Susan Page. The only reason I haven't read this, honestly, is because they didn't give me an arc. I'm angry. I wanted an arc. But I didn't get one, and I'm still going to read it. I love Susan Page, honestly. She's one of my favorite nonfiction biographer writers. I first got exposed to her as a host on the Diane Rehm show a decade ago. It's an NPR talk show. She's done multiple books now, and now this is on Barbara Walters. I'm not particularly excited about Barbara Walters, but I'm excited about Susan Page, and I know she has a way of making someone I didn't think is interesting be really interesting. I didn't think first Barbara Bush was interesting, and then I left that book thinking, maybe she is more important than I realized. And I think the fact that Susan Page chose to write a book about her is enough for me to want to care. Then next up to most anticipated releases for the second half of the year. We'll start with another nonfiction book, David Sobel's The Elements of Marie Curie. And this is pretty self-explanatory. Nonfiction book about her. I really like David Sobel. I don't always love her works or find them the most easiest reads, but they're thoughtful, and she's one of my favorite science history writers, put it that way. This is her first book in like, I think 4 or 5 years. I think it was 2017, so it's a lot longer than 4 or 5 years. And she's actually pretty old, so I'm not sure how many more books we're gonna get by her. The Night Guest by Hildur Notskdottir. This is, I think, a horror mystery novella being adapted to English by one of my favorite authors, Mary Robinette Kowal. And she's actually doing the narration as well. I got an e-arc of this, but I'm probably gonna end up holding off until the audiobook comes out. But I will be reading it as soon as it does. But it's one that I'm intrigued by, partly because the cover is just really cute. I think cute. It's very appealing, I should say. And the fact that Mary Robinette Kowal was attached to it makes me intrigued, because she's not usually involved with dark stuff. And then lastly, this last one's actually a re-release, a republication of a out-of-print work called The Fortunate Fall by Raphael Carter. And Raphael Carter is a trans author who wrote this book that is a cyberpunk queer work that apparently has a lot of trans queer themes. It came out before The Matrix, but in my mind, the little I read about it, it seems to be in that sort of vein of cyberpunk as a milieu to explore trans allegory. And this was another book that I heard about from Joe Walton's collection of essays or blog posts I've read. And I'm really excited to get to it. I went ahead and pre-ordered the audiobook. I'm so excited to see it getting re-released. Perfect timing, honestly. The moment I hear about it, it's the moment it comes out. Yay. So definitely check that out. I'm mentioning it here, one, because I'm excited for it, but also because I think it is a book that I'm hoping will be good, and I think more people should be excited about the fact that it's getting re-released, given the fact that it is clearly a forgotten gem as a work that's from the 90s, that is cyberpunk, sci-fi, trans, queer, speculative fiction that no one talks about. I've never heard anyone talk about it before Joe Walton, so let's start talking about it, please. Next up, genre you've been loving or reading the most. And for this one, of course, I just have my genre plot. It's not much different. I could read the plot to you, but what's the point? Sci-fi, speculative fiction is my favorite. When it comes to nonfiction, politics, and science, that's the traditional. Classics are a bit higher. I think part of that is that when I read a backlist book, if it is classic, I will classify it as classic above all else. So that probably is ticking down a bit higher. One thing I'll say here, I'll comment on the fact that my nonfiction reading has not been great, 18%. And if we go back to that first plot, I've noticed that my nonfiction wasn't high enough, and I've tried to improve it. And I think when we get to nonfiction November, and I hopefully read only nonfiction, it should help push it up. I don't like the fact that it's less than 25%, like less than a quarter. And I really still want it to be 30 to 33%. So consider that a goal moving forward, is to improve on that. The next question that I've added again, I modified this from your favorite author, new author. I made it author and audiobook narrator highlights. So this isn't just new to me, but really just the standouts. Indra Das, I read their horror book. I mentioned both their books actually in my queer recommendation list in my last video. Basically, so I read their second book. Rather, I read a second book by them for the first time this year. So technically, you could say they're kind of new in the sense that I can officially say I love their works. Queer, speculative. This one is more, I guess, I don't say, it's maybe dark fantasy, and it's beautiful, and it's very, is it Ursula K. Le Guin-esque, yeah. At least this book was, not necessarily the first book. The first one was very Anne Rice-esque. Point is that I'm loving their writing, and I love the rich queerness in their works. More people should be reading them. I haven't heard about them. People need to be reading Indra Das. And consider it your homework for the next year. Or for the rest of the year. Nanakwame Adjei, their book was the second thing I read by them. I love their short story collection, and I love the fact that my second read them was amazing too. So I can officially say they're a favorite author now. I adore their works. I think they're really good at speculative fiction with really thoughtful approaches, really thoughtful execution of speculative fiction to explore real world themes in a very compelling way. The perfect trifecta for what I want from speculative fiction. Haley Piper and Ted Chiang, two authors I think I've talked about before, and that I've read before, but I've definitely read more by them again. I guess one of the last two. I've read more by them now. Haley Piper is a queer trans author who does a lot of Lovecraftian horror. I've only ever really liked their horror. I've read some more recent ones that aren't as high up as the first ones that I read, but they are still a horror writer that for some reason is not getting the attention she deserves. People need to be reading Hailey Piper. If you like horror, Lovecraftian horror, in queer works, obviously, check out Hailey Piper. Cannot stress that enough. Ted Chiang is an obvious one. Everyone knows Ted Chiang. And for the obvious reasons I've already talked about, I love him. I love his works, I should say. And then moving on to audiobook highlights, these aren't necessarily new to me, but Bonnie Turpin, I love her narration. I think she is probably my favorite narrator next to Scott Brick. Fleet Cooper is the narrator of 2 books I've ever listened to. One this year being Find Me the Votes, that nonfiction book about Donald Trump trying to still overturn the election in Georgia. And he narrated a horror collection, Fearful Cemeteries by Ellen Datlow. And I was so taken aback when I heard him read this nonfiction book because I thought, oh, this feels like a horror narrator. And I thought he was really good at that horror anthology. I really like his voice. It's very, masculine in the right kind of way. And I think it just works really well. And he did a really good job, honestly, for this nonfiction book as well. And then I want to mention authors again. Ocean Vuong, obviously, phenomenal. This is because it was narrated by him, the author. And it was just, normally I don't like author narrators, but there's a heart here that he's able to impart. And it just really, really worked. I think he had enough range emotionally and in voices to make it easy to get immersed in it, while also feeling the heart of the story that he himself wrote into it. And it's just why this really stands out. Like I say I don't like author narrations, but then I see this and I'm reminded of how high those highs can go if an author does it well. And also Angela Y. Davis, because she surprised me at how, again, immersive as she was at narrating her book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle. I think it was a really effective way of communicating that, especially when a lot of those were speeches anyways. God, I'm exhausted. Almost there. We're so close, I can taste it. New favorite characters and worlds. And for this, I'm doing clusters of characters because it's hard for me to remember specific characters, but I can remember groups, especially in books. I can remember worlds. So for the worlds, I guess I didn't have it listed here, but I mentioned Something Takes the A Train, Cassandra Claw's book, and how that felt like I was in the Buffyverse, Angel, and again, I guess obviously that was one that I really loved. There was also some really thoughtful ones in Story of My Life by Ted Chiang or in others. Specifically, I think I really enjoyed the religious one. It was like the ability to see God. That sounds very dystopian, like terrifying, but at the same time, I loved the way in which he explored some scientific ideas in an environment where religion is like the actual truth. I don't necessarily want to live there, but of all the worlds I've been exposed to in the books that I've read, that's got to be some of the top ones. I just had really thoughtful design. I think there's a lot you can do with it. It's just really intriguing to me. And then for characters, I'm just going to highlight the whole cluster of people inside of The Long Way to a Small Hungry Planet by Becky Chambers. I adored this book. I did not expect as much as I did, and I'm devastated to find out that the sequels in this series are standalone novels that really follow new characters or characters on the edge of the story. But at the same time, and I think it speaks to why I love the characters so much, is that because it's this isolated experience where we're meeting them, we're getting to know them, and we're getting to see this nuanced perspective of them at their best and worst. They felt so real, but also so lovable and just so enjoyable. And this book made me so happy. I love these people so much. These entities, because they weren't all people. This is a good sci-fi book that does a good job at exploring the diversity of societies, but also of creatures that would exist in space. Books that evoke the most emotional response. This is, instead of crying or made me happy, it sort of just alludes to all of those. And for this, I'm just going to put some covers on the cover here, because really all the books that I have to talk about are books I've already talked about, because we're getting so long anyways. These are just books that made me angry, happy, sad, sometimes all the above, and they're definitely worth reading. So if you want it to evoke you in some way, in some emotional way. Now, favorite video so far of the year. Let's do some honorable mentions. My Blackathon reading vlog, I actually liked how that turned out. It was also, I think, the 1 year anniversary trip that we had on with my then partner, and it was a fun video, and I really enjoyed making it. It's the only vlog I've made so far, although I am coming close to making another one. I'm really excited for that. If that was out, that'd probably be my favorite, because I'm really liking how this next vlog is coming up. But yeah, I enjoyed that. My backlist TBR project, I really enjoy that. I don't necessarily love the TBRs, like they're fine, but I hate the fact that I sort of restricted myself to those, but it's also fun to sort of think about the best books I should be reading. I wish there was a bit of a conversation about, older books and the ones that we should be thinking about and that deserve talking about, because I don't necessarily think that there was enough dedicated attention to those. I highlighted the ones I could find up front. There have been others that I wanted to read that I have been reading in addition to those. Those are my books that I plan on reading for this year. It was still a 2000s video I have yet to post that I've already recorded months ago at this point. And that's hopefully coming out soon. But my favorite video of all, honestly, it has to be the Indian Lake trilogy review. I just really enjoyed making that review. I'm very proud of what I had to say. It's one of those videos where I don't edit it or watch it and think to myself, ugh, I could have really done this better or done that better. I thought I really touched on the things that I wanted to touch on. I'm not saying it's the best ever, but I think I accomplished what I had hoped to do and communicated my thoughts in the clearest way that I think I could have. So I'm very happy with that video. If you haven't watched it, please do. It talks about why I love that series so much. I guess I'll also mention I've not made as many videos this year as I wanted. It's fine, but I've made, I think, the most standalone reviews that I've ever done. As time has gone on, I think I've been more selective with what I want to review. Because earlier in the year, I was making reviews because I wanted to make reviews. And now it's like I don't necessarily want to talk about a book just because I read it or I had hoped to review it. I want to make sure that the books that I talk about in the standalone reviews are the books that evoked some kind of intense response, whether it be positive or negative. I just want to have something to say. And forget the last question. So what are my priorities for the rest of the year? This is slightly modified from, the books I plan on reading or whatever. Let's start with just some general aims I've alluded to already, NetGalley and nonfiction. I just want to improve these. As far as my NetGalley position right now, it's solid. I've read so many books now from NetGalley that I'm hovering right at 80%, just below, because it's so hard to get below there. But I'm going to try really hard not to request any more books, mostly because as I aim to read more backlist books, it makes it harder to make time for NetGalley because they're new releases. Which means when I do read new releases, they're overwhelmingly being NetGalley books. And that's sort of the conundrum that I'm in right now, where I have a lot of NetGalley books I need to review, and I can't keep requesting NetGalley books because I simply cannot read all of those and also maintain my backlist goal. Brandon Sanderson is, I guess, another priority for the year. I've read Oathbringer. Next up, it's going to be the Downshard or something, the novella, followed by Rhythm of War, followed eventually by, of course, the newest release. I plan on committing to end this first half of Stormlight Archive. And aside from the backlist TBR goal, I have an ongoing video project where I'm reading books for a certain theme. To give you a hint, I've read The Trial and How Do You Live and Dare Me, and I'm going to be reading, moving forward, The Light We Lost, Poor Things, and Brideshead Revisited, among others. This is sort of a hint. I think if you were to look closely, you might be able to figure out what my theme is, but hopefully I want to give that theme video out by the end of this next quarter, or at least by the end of the year. And then that's that. Moving on to the conclusion now. That is that. We are probably almost at an hour for this video. Who cares? You either like it or you don't. If you made it to the end, I appreciate it. I really, really, really appreciate y'all watching, and I hope you enjoyed this and found some books that you like. If you're new to the channel and you made it to the end, that must mean you like me, so please like and subscribe. But I'm rambling. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, and everyone, I hope you stay safe, and I'll see you next time. Okay?